Hello, everyone. Today I'm talking to you about a subject that's really important to me since, not only do I lead suicide prevention uh, trainings, I also work with a lot of people who are grieving from the loss of suicide of a friend or a family member. And today's topic is what not to say to somebody grieving from suicide loss or any other type of loss in their life. You know, I think when people say things that aren't helpful, they are trying to be helpful. They're trying to be supportive. If you, for those of you that are familiar with the Bible, you may remember the book of Job, where three friends come over after he's had this loss, and he's lost his family, he's lost his health, and there's big theological discussion going. And in Job 16:2, Job says to the friends who come over, I've heard many things like this. What miserable comforters you all are. And many times, what we mean for good, is not helpful, and many times actually quite hurtful. And not only does it not help the person who's grieving, but it makes their grief, even worse. And so, unless somebody takes the time like I'm doing now to share, with somebody who's going through the grieving process, what may or may not be helpful for you, you just don't know. And if you've not experienced significant grief, you may think these things are helpful, or some of these things might be helpful to you, even though they're not helpful to most people. I share this, from a perspective of somebody who lost a sister to suicide. Multiple friends over my lifetime to suicide. Just a few years ago, I lost as I said, lost my sister to suicide, but I also had my father pass away 6 weeks after that, and then less than 3 months after that, my other sister passed away. So losing two sisters and a father in one day, 1 year. I kind of understand what it's like to experience loss. And so I've got these broken down into some categories. The first category is minimizing the loss. It seems kind of natural that, if I can, make the loss seem less important, or, minimize it in some way, it won't seem like such a great loss. But the problem is, when you're feeling the pain of loss, you don't want to minimize it. You don't want it suggested that your grief that you have is not important, it's not real, that you're making a big deal about it. So one of the things that sounds so positive is you have so much to be grateful for. But I'm telling you, while that sounds so positive and can be so true, at that moment of loss and the weeks and months after that, looking at somebody and saying, "Oh, you don't need to be grieving so hard because you've got so much to live for," that does not help. It may sound helpful in your mind, but I'm telling you, it is not helpful for most people to hear that. You're strong, you can handle it. Well, at that moment, I may be strong and I may be able to handle it. I handled the loss of 3 family members in a year. But I want you to listen to me, to be there for me, to love me, to care for me. I don't want you to minimize what I'm feeling at the moment by saying, "Oh, you're strong, you can have it." There are times that people say things that they're not helpful, that could never be considered helpful. I've heard this one twice in my life said to somebody, and I tell you that both times the person deserved a punch in the face. I'm telling you, if you said this, you need to fall on your face and repent. You need to call the person up and apologize. This is the cruelest thing I've ever heard said to anybody in my life. At least you have other children. Now, neither time was the person suffering from a suicide loss, but when you lose a child, when a child of yours passes away, to think that somehow you're making them feel better by saying, at least you have other children. While that may be true, you know, unless you've experienced that loss, which I haven't. I had a 6-year-old brother whom I helped take care of as an adult pass away. That's the closest thing I have, and it's not the same. I mean, I can't imagine with 3 children. I just cannot imagine, what it would feel like to lose a child. And so you're not being helpful if you think that, you're pointing out that, oh, look, you've got all these other blessings in your life. I mean, the grief is strong, and you have a right to grieve. You have a right to feel the pain that you feel at that time. Now, you can hold on to your grief too long, and but you never start feeling the hurt. People say time makes all things better. Well, time makes them a little easier, but you still never stop grieving the loss. And this one, the fourth one under minimizing loss, has specifically to do with suicide. And I've heard this one a couple of times in my life too, after somebody ended their life with suicide. Well, this family member had a mental illness. You should have seen this coming. Like the fact that my sister was suicidal. I knew my sister was suicidal. She had been suicidal for years. She kept the family at arm's length. I did whatever I could, to try and help her. Get help for her alcoholism. Tried to encourage her to get help for her mental health issues. But while it is true she had a mental illness, and yes, I did know that she was suicidal, telling me I should have seen this coming or I could have done more, doesn't help at the time. At the time of a loss, you need people who are there with you. You're not specifically trying to make you feel better, not trying to minimize what you do or give you, the next point, giving unsolicited advice. A grieving person needs to feel sad in the present. The pain is real, and many times the pain is unbelievably real. And to try and point out that that in the future things are going to be better, you're not able. Most people are not able at that moment in their life to think about the future. These people attempts to cheer them up, it makes them feel like the speaker is saying to them to ignore the pain they're currently feeling. And to work through the grieving process, you've got to feel that pain. If you deny it and you ignore it, it just makes the grieving process that much harder to get through, makes it last that much longer. I've heard things like this. You just need to get over it and move on. Well, if I could just get over it and move on, I would. But right now, the truth is, I need to feel the pain, and I really need you to understand that I'm in pain. Because this is not only unsolicited advice, this is minimizing, my pain and minimizing my right to have it. And so I find that quite offensive. You just need to be strong. Well, yes, I do need to be strong, but you're telling me that does not help me in the least. It doesn't help me at all. I'm in pain. And I need you to help be my strength. I need you standing there beside me. I need you loving me. I need you propping me up during this time of significant loss. And whether it's a regular, not a regular death, but a death of a family member from not suicide or from suicide, just telling me that I need to be strong doesn't help. And another thing that doesn't help at all is spiritualizing the loss. I've been a pastor, for many, many years. I, worked in church planting. I've worked with a lot of people, and I've seen all these things said, that are coming up, but I don't find them helpful at all. I understand what the person's saying when they say it. I understand how they think it's going to be helpful, but these things really aren't. And so spiritualizing in the lost and comes up with God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Well, it's dubious as whether that is true or not. I mean, you've got to manipulate scripture together to come up with that one. We've got a little couch cushion. I don't know who gave it to us, but it's a quote from that says, "I know God won't give me more than I can handle. I wish he didn't trust me so much." That comes from a famous nun named Teresa. And but just saying that God won't give you more than you can handle doesn't help you in the moment. Doesn't help anybody whatsoever in the moment. Because at the moment you feel like it's more than you can handle. I mean, the pain is incredible. And so when you spiritualize it that way, you just totally evaluate what I'm feeling. You just say, I know you're hurting and you don't have a right to feel that way because God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Everything happens for a reason. Now that was just plain stupid. That is not only not helpful, it is insulting to the person that hears that. So you're telling me there's a good reason why my loved one died. I mean, everything happens for a reason. What possible reason can there be that my son, daughter, mother, sister, brother, friend ended their life with suicide? There is a reason. The person is usually suffering severe depression, can't see a way out, and they're in more pain than they know how to handle. But how is saying something like that to me helpful? Things like this next one. That this person is in hell because suicide is a sin. Well, there's nothing in the Bible, there's nothing in any major religion that I know of that says that that suicide is an unforgivable sin. To look at me and say God can't understand the pain of mental illness, God can't understand that a person is not in a place where they can make the right decision. And despite it, I mean, how can it possibly help me to say, to point out the sin of somebody that passed away? I mean, I don't care what it's about. Somebody dies that was an alcoholic. You walking up to me and pointing out that this loved one was an alcoholic, does not help. It's like saying, that person's life was not worth living. Because they did this or they did that. Yes, but that they weren't a perfect human being. But I'll tell you right to your face, you're not a perfect human being either, and you don't deserve to die. And whatever inconsistencies you have in your life, doesn't mean that you deserve to die. I personally believe that in spite of our faults, almost everybody in this world's life makes this world a better place. And I'm never, ever under any circumstance when somebody passes away to suggest that somehow this world's a better place because this horrible sinner's not in it. And the opposite is true. The person's in a better place. This one gets said some about suicide. It gets said all the time about a death in the family. For each of my family members, I must have heard except for my sister, who was, an alcoholic, a prostitute, somebody, struggling significantly in her life. But my father and sister, yeah, I must have heard over 30 times with both of them that, oh, they're in a better place. Well, yes, I knew they were in a better place. I really did. I believed with all my heart that they were in a better place. But it didn't help me one bit for you to tell me they're in a better place. That it wasn't comforting. It didn't make me feel better. They still passed away and they're not in my life. I'm still suffering that loss of them leaving my life before time. Now, my dad wasn't so hard, because he was in, end-stage heart disease, and I had been spending as much time with him as I could. For 2 years, I was preparing for his death. My sister's death was sudden, and nothing you could say, could make me not feel the loss I was feeling. So it wasn't helpful to say, this person is in a better place. Another thing that doesn't help is asking painful questions about the person. I mean, it's a human nature to be curious, but probing questions about the intimate details of suicide are invasive and hurtful. And those who genuinely care about the grieving person should let them decide when and how much they want to tell about their loved one's death. Now, this can apply to any death, but especially in suicide. I mean, it is so shocking. Even if you knew the person was suicidal, and most often, people haven't picked up on that, and vast majority of people who suffer loss from suicide had no clue that the person was suicidal. And so these probing questions do not happen. Questions like, why do you think that they did this? Why do you think that they took their lives? Well, I have no clue. And even if I did have a clue, we're talking about helping a person, and this is just not helpful. I don't want to think about why they did it. It doesn't help me in any way to think about why they did it. I had an acquaintance who ended their life after they were caught having sex with a young teenager, a friend of his daughter's. And yes, I mean, but he was, the family was grieving. Yeah, they knew that this probably played a role in it, but asking them, why do you think they did it? Is again, a way of pointing out what was bad about the person. It must have been bad. He must have had a real reason. What do you think that reason? That doesn't help. It's just not helpful. Or just a curious question. And I mean, this is perfectly innocent. How did your loved one end their life? I mean, that's natural curiosity. But right after, somebody, suffers a loss from suicide, they don't want to talk about how they do it. I mean, that's not the first thing on their mind. Other questions like, did they leave a note? What was said in the note? Did you find the body, or did you have to clean up after the? None of these questions are helpful. And so I bring this up because it's so natural to be curious. But this is not the time for you to be expressing this to the person that's suffering. It's enough to know that it happened. In fact, quite often, you're not going to know it was a suicide, because the family is not going to go around telling everybody that they died by suicide. They'll make up other reasons. And one of the reasons that they do this, is not because they want to deceive you. They don't want to be asked these kind of questions. They don't want you prying into their lives and asking these personal questions that they're not ready to answer. The next set is suggesting blame. You know, and it's not helpful because quite often family and friends are already blaming themselves, especially in a suicide, because um, they're all asking themselves, what could I have done? Why didn't I see this coming? Why didn't I know? And so for you to come out and try to point blame either at me or anything else, it's not helpful thing for, somebody suffering a loss to experience. And so questions like, or statements like, you should have seen this coming. Or why didn't you get, they were suffering depression. Why didn't you get them help? They had a mental health condition. Why didn't you get them help? Other questions, what was going on in your family implies that there was something so negative in my family that my family member ended their life. That's again, how can you possibly think that that's helpful? Them identifying the reason while they're grieving, just adds extra pain. Guilt on top of grief is not a good combination. And so, your intention may not be, to blame them and to bring up guilt, but when you ask these things, you're not helping. The last one in this section is probably, fill in the blank is what sent them over the edge. Trying to, figure out why the person did it with the family member that is suffering loss, is not helpful for them. Another thing is saying something negative about the person who died. Doesn't matter what they died from, it's not the time. But especially in suicide, making statements like, that was an awful selfish thing for them to do. That just makes my grief worse. I may be feeling that they were selfish, but you to stand and look me in the eye and say that, it's not helpful. Statements like they chose to leave you, or they didn't love you enough to stay around, or you didn't make them feel important enough to make them stay around. Or it's too bad that their faith wasn't strong enough to overcome their problems. None of these things, nothing in the world that you can say that was negative about the person is not helpful. I don't care, whether they had drinking or drug problems, they had, you name anything negative. They had a violent temper. This is not the time to point that out. This is the time to help the person who is grieving to feel better about their life. And the simplest way of doing that is to express your care and love, and not try to fix them at this point. And when I'm in deep grief, I don't need to be fixed. I don't want to be fixed. I have to work through this myself. And you standing there beside me, no matter what, that's what's going to help. There's a list of a few more things just in general not to do, but I want to point out, which I should have done at the very beginning. This is a longer video, and I'm covering a lot of stuff, and so I'm going to make a total separate video this week about what can you do when a family member or friend is suffering from grief from a suicide, or suffering grief from any kind of loss in their life. So while I think it would be helpful in this video to do it, this would push the video to over 45 minutes to try and add that. So in the next couple of days, I'll have that second video up and have a specific link to it in the description of this video. Other things that do not help: saying that you understand, but that does not help. You may care about the person, but you don't understand what they feel like. And you know, I've heard other people say, unless you have experienced a similar loss. Truth is, you don't know. You know, I had a sister end her life in suicide. Uh, and if you had a sister or brother or sibling end their life in suicide, I may have a clue of what you feel like, but I do not know how you feel. I mean, this is the worst thing one of the worst things you could ever say to anybody is, I understand what you're feeling, because you don't, because every one of us is unique. And another thing is, don't avoid me. My wife has suffered cancer for 3 years now, and hopefully we're on the winning side of this battle. But we had a lady that went to our church who was over the women's ministry, who never called, and she would ask how Elaine was doing when I was at church or she was at church. But when she'd ask me, I said, give her a call and ask her. She said, but I don't know what to say. And so don't avoid the person who's suffering because you don't know what to say, because you don't have to say anything. Just being there, taking them out for coffee, bringing cookies to their house, or bringing them a meal, or calling up and say, hey, would you like to go for a walk? You just don't avoid them. That is never helpful. I mean, that is destructive in its own way, as saying the wrong thing. Because we need to make them feel important. Don't give me your summation of why something happened. Because I'm not ready to hear them yet. I'm not in the process at this moment of trying to figure out why something happened. So, it's better if you let me figure it out when I want to. If I'm suffering and I bring it up to you, then it's perfectly fine for you to enter that conversation. Don't give me any kind of pat answer, especially in the beginning. And we talked about it, like, the little pat answers, like, they're in a better place. That's such a positive thought. But in my pain, it's not what I need to hear at the moment. Don't talk too much. I read this from a list that somebody put up, and I like what they said. My pain has damaged my hearing. When somebody is in pain, it's much more important that you listen than it is for you to talk. You don't rush me. Don't try to help me get over my grief in a short period of time. It will take as long as it needs to take. Just walk beside me. Just be my friend. Just be there for me. Because when you're suffering a loss, you need to know that people love you. So just be there for them. Don't ignore it. Go out of your way to make sure that you stay in contact with them. Text 2 to 3 times a week, letting you know you're thinking about them. The weekly phone call, asking what you can do. And this one is, I kind of like this idea. It's like, don't ask me how I am or how I'm doing. Ask me, how I'm doing today. Because I can't think about the future. When you're in the middle of grief, you can't think your way about in the future. You can only think about this moment. So when you ask me how I'm doing today, and I will try to answer it honestly, especially if you've got time to hear how I'm doing today. And another thing, I have a lot of Christian friends that say, how you doing? And the person, in their grief or any other time, they're hurting so bad they don't feel like talking. And they say, well, I'm doing fine. And so it is not helpful. Well, are you really doing fine? You don't look fine to me. Yeah, I've had 2 or 3 friends in my life that like to do, and they think, and they go around bragging about doing that. You know, well, when I'm ready to talk about it, I'll talk about it. And trying to force me to talk about it at this moment doesn't help me. Don't tell me that I will recover. At this moment, I have no intention of recovering. Because to say it like that is makes it sound like it's an illness. Oh, you'll get over this. Well, unless you've had, you know, deep grief over a loss, you can't understand that they don't want, but that they don't want to be told they'll get over it. You would naturally think everybody wants to get over it. And I think deep down they do, but you feel like a betrayal. You feel like if I get over it, in the next week, I'm somehow betraying the person. If I can get over it quickly, I must not have loved them. So, be honest, and you don't tell me to, get over it quickly. Because this loss has left a huge hole in the middle of my heart. It's left it's like something was ripped out of me. And yes, probably over time, I will get better and better and better, but I will never be the same. My dad, I haven't had a tremendous amount of grief. As I said, but I miss him all the time. We were so close. There was a part of me that was taken away when I need to talk to somebody, I can't call him. When I'm hurting about, really deeply about something, I just can't give my dad a call. He was always there for me all my life, and this loss will never be gone. Though it's not that hard for me at this moment to live with that loss. I don't want for somebody, especially right after he died, to make it feel like that this hole in my heart could be filled. My sister that didn't end her life was surprising. I had open heart surgery, and a month later she had it. And 6 hours before her open heart surgery, she had a massive heart attack and died. This was sudden. I mean, my sister and I were always close. I mean, it was like somebody with very sharp steel tip gloves shoved their hand in my chest and ripped my heart right out of my body. I don't want somebody to look at me the day that happened, or the week or 2 weeks after, and tell me, oh, it's going to be okay. You'll recover. You're going to get over this. I did not want to get over it at the time. I knew I would get over it. There was no doubt in my mind I would get over it. But it wasn't helpful, to me to minimize the amount of pain that I was feeling at the time. And so, here's some things that that hopefully you've listened to and you've paid attention to, and that you're going to become much better at talking to your friends, who are going through grief, because you're going to have friends go through grief, and you're at some time in your life going to go through grief. Let's learn how to be helpful. And remember, it's not our job. If you're one of my good friends and you have a loss, it's not my job to fix you. It's my job to love you. And I'm going to encourage you that while so much with this was built on, not doing the negative, I want to end up by reinforcing the positive. Commit to loving the person with a loss with more love than you've ever showed them. That they, and that you're there for them. Let them know you care for them, that you're thinking about them. Make them feel important to you. knowing that there are people that really care helps with loss much more than anything else we can physically do, much more than anything we can say. When I know without a doubt that you're there for me, that makes a difference. And I'll end with an example. I mentioned my wife has, we're coming up, well, we just passed 3 years of her diagnosis with stage 4 cancer. But a year before this happened, we left our church and went to help my son-in-law plant a church. And because we wanted to be, help him and my daughter, and we wanted to be around our grandchildren at church. So, we went. When we got our diagnosis, I called our previous pastor. They set up a prayer team to come, pray with my wife, and that prayer team committed to my wife. Every month, virtually there was a 3-person prayer team, and almost every single month, all 3 people contacted my wife to see how she was doing. They called her and just listened to her. They sent her texts. They were there. And because of that, while I haven't lost my wife, this was so beneficial for her to have people that showed they cared. That's made this process so much easier. The same thing applies with grief. When somebody loses somebody, the fact that you're there and you don't, and they know that no matter what, you're going to still be there, will make more difference in their life than anything that you could possibly say. And presence means, much more than anything. And, a lot of churches talk about a ministry of presence. And that is just simply this, that I'm here, I'm with you, and I will never go away. And that's what I want you to encourage you at the end of this little discussion, is to, under no circumstance, ignore them, let them know they're loved. You don't have to fix them. You just have to be there. Well, I wish you all the best. I hope that anybody who's listened to this will, find my video on what to say and what to do, because I'd much rather, emphasize the positive than the negative. I started off with this one, but please, take time to find out what you can do, because, everybody goes through loss, but, going through loss is one of the ways that we can grow emotionally, spiritually, and that happens best when we have people around us to love us. So I wish you all a full life, and remember, always love everybody around you and always love them big.